Welcome to the Discovery Pod, where we talk to leading experts from the University of Adelaide about solutions to society's most pressing challenges. Female reproductive conditions like endometriosis and polycystic ovary syndrome are only just starting to receive the attention, funding and understanding they deserve. Joining me on the Discovery Pod today to discuss this very relevant topic is fertility and endometriosis expert, Associate Professor Louise and Dr. Jodie Avery, who is a research fellow with a background in polycystic ovary syndrome. So to begin, Louise, do you mind telling me how prevalent endometriosis is in Australia and what it actually is?
So there have been a couple of studies just in the last year or so that shows that 1 in 9 Australian women have endometriosis and that it takes about 6.4 years to get a diagnosis. So it's a very common condition affecting about not quite 10% of Australian women. It causes a lot of problems for people because they get severe period pain. They often have to take time off school. They miss out on education. They miss out on employment opportunities. And often it has quite a significant impact on their lives. Additionally, not that many people know about it, although it's getting more and more recognised. And so hopefully people are starting to have conversations about it. People are starting to explore endometriosis in the media and at school, where it's been a really taboo topic, and it's been hard to get funding, hard for people to recognise how common it is. And a lot of women have symptoms and they feel it's hard to talk to people about them and to actually get help to get them addressed.
So what actually is endometriosis? What happens in the body?
Okay, so endometriosis is where the lining of the womb grows outside the womb on the pelvic organs or in the pelvic cavity. And what happens is when you get your period, the tissue comes away and the cells break down and die. But if that happens in the pelvis, they can't be removed from the body. And so your immune system has to come in and clear those cells. So you get an inflammatory process occurring in the pelvis, and that can cause pain, it can cause bloating, it can cause very heavy periods, but also it can affect fertility, as eggs and sperm and embryos have to be in that inflammatory environment. And then with repeated episodes of pain every month, you can actually get a pain syndrome, where the nerve in your back, in your spinal column, gets activated, and that can sensitise the pelvic organs, the pelvic floor muscles, but also the brain can be affected by that. So people often get other symptoms like bladder and bowel pain, or stabbing pain from the muscles contracting, or headaches and migraines. So it really affects a lot of your body, and it can be quite debilitating.
Yeah. Well, I know from personal experience and just from talking to many people that a lot of those symptoms that you've just explained have been normalised in history, obviously leading to that very long diagnosis time where women experiencing those sometimes very debilitating symptoms aren't taken seriously. And I can imagine that would have huge psychological impacts as well, being told that it's all in your head.
Absolutely. And people worry what those symptoms could be, and they are worried it might be something other than endo that might be quite significant and serious and life-threatening, and not to be able to get reassurance about that, but also not to be able to get any treatment because people haven't acknowledged it, is very frustrating. And it's quite tricky because endo does have an inheritance as well. So sometimes your relations, like your mother, may have had endo, but we can't really get a diagnosis without surgery at the moment, and she may not have been diagnosed, so her normalised experience of periods may in fact be with endometriosis. So she may be saying, that's fine, I had that too.
Yeah.
And so might your cousins and sisters, and actually no one's really known within the family they've had endo.
Right.
So again, it can sometimes be a barrier for people to get recognised and treated, and even to be able to get your own self-care without knowing what you've got is very hard to be able to actually put your own your own, treatments in place and ways of managing that pain. And we do have a lot of different ways of managing pain now, but it has to be recognised and understood. And a lot of people really struggle to get that understanding.
Right, yeah, and of course, and it's a spectrum as well. There's severity of endometriosis. Can you explain that briefly?
Absolutely. So everybody's experience of pain is different, and there's lots of different things that go into experiencing pain. So some people actually don't have much pain at all, and they won't even know they've got endometriosis until they try and have a baby, and it's just a bit more difficult. And then people will actually discover that's what they've got, and they've not had the pain symptoms. Other people, some of those pain symptoms may have been triggered by something other than endometriosis. So they may have very similar symptoms, but not necessarily have endo as well. And that makes it very difficult for doctors to give people a diagnosis. But all of those pains have to be treated too, and sometimes there's just a real barrier for people, and people have to go to different doctors and really start educating themselves on how they can manage some of that pain.
Definitely. And Jodie, can you describe PCOS or polycystic ovary syndrome?
Okay. Polycystic ovary syndrome, very funny name. It used to be called Stein-Leventhal syndrome when it was discovered by Mr. Stein, or Dr. Stein and Dr. Leventhal in 1936. So it's been around, known about for a very long time, but it's obviously existed long before that. They say that in the Dutch famine, the women that were reproducing were the ones with PCOS because they were able to reproduce in an environment where there was very little food around, and they were able to maintain their metabolism. So there's a lot of anthropology around PCOS as well. So PCOS is a syndrome where the way they diagnose it now is if you've got irregular periods or you're not ovulating, or you've got clinical features of excess androgens in your body, excess male hormones in your body, or you've got cysts on your ovaries. And they're not actually cysts, they're follicles. So they're underdeveloped or arrested development of the follicle, which is the egg sac. So if you've got 2 out of 3 of those symptoms, then you can be diagnosed with PCOS.
Right, okay. So it's a pretty difficult to understand condition, isn't it? Because it has that hormonal involvement.
Yes.
Can you describe that androgen?
So what happens if a woman has excess androgens in her body, it can lead to things like hirsutism, which is excess hair, so facial hair and maybe in other parts of the body as well. And that also affects the periods. So you can have completely irregular periods, you can have no periods, you can have a long period. There's lots of different ways that PCOS can be expressed in the body.
Okay. Does that have anything to do with the follicles, the cysts? Does that hormone and cyst?
I'm not 100% sure on that side of things. I have to defer to Louise, who's a medical or a gynaecologist.
Oh, no, of course. No, that's fine.
So what happens is if your metabolism is set up so that the signal from the brain can't get through to make an egg grow in the ovary, a little group of eggs, and sometimes it's a very large group, often people have many more eggs than other women who don't have PCOS, they start to grow but they can't keep developing, and you find these little follicles that have an egg in them, but they just sit and wait. And often women with polycystic ovarian syndrome would have up to 80 or 100 eggs that would come out all in 1 month, whereas most people would have a much lower number than that, up to 20 when they're young. So people with PCOS have a lot of eggs there. It's just that we're not talking to them properly, and that's the treatments we use, is to actually signal to the ovary to get those eggs out. And often we use tablets or injections to overcome the barrier to get the eggs starting to grow. Okay. But we have to be careful not to get them all out at once.
Yeah.
That can happen.
Right, okay. So Jodie, you discussed the diagnosis of PCOS being the cysts, clinical signs, things like that. Do you think that people are quite readily diagnosed? or is there an underdiagnosis going on?
No, there's an underdiagnosis. It's just like endometriosis. And often PCOS takes like 16 years to be diagnosed in some people. But they are starting to diagnose younger women. So if a adolescent woman has irregular periods, she might go to the doctor and say, this is going on. Or if they've got facial hair, they might wonder why that is, because that can be a point of, they get teased by people. So, or they're overweight and they just can't lose weight no matter what they do. They might exercise to excess and they still can't lose any weight. So,
and so they're pretty classic symptoms of PCOS.
But then you can get skinny PCOS as well. So there are actually four different phenotypes of PCOS, so depending on how it manifests in the body as well.
Okay. And Louise, how is endometriosis diagnosed at the moment?
The classical diagnosis is with surgery. So there's a real problem there because people who are rural and remote, or people who find it difficult to access surgery for economic reasons, or certain countries it's hard to get surgery to have a look, and we would usually do a laparoscopy, which is where we use a little telescope through the belly button and just have a wee look. And that's really the only definitive way of diagnosing endo, is to actually see it and see it in the pelvis. But we are getting much, much better with scans, but they're very specific scans. And in Adelaide, there's only a few places that will actually do a proper endometriosis scan. So most scans will just look at the womb and look at the ovaries. And in an endometriosis scan, you really have to look outside of that and actually have to look and see how the organs slide over each other, and look along the bowel and look along the ligaments to see how thick they are. And it's quite a specific technique that's really been around for only about 5 years in Australia. And if you get one of those scans, if they do find some signs of endometriosis, it's really pretty accurate. It's sort of in the 95% accurate. If they don't find anything, it's only about 60% accurate. So still 40% of people would miss a diagnosis with a scan. So we're trying to improve that at the moment. And MRI does also help with diagnosis, and we're trying to put those two together, sort of using artificial intelligence to try and get people a better diagnosis at the moment.
Yeah, so that's one of your current research projects.
Absolutely. And we're just wanting to make it more accessible for people to get a diagnosis, and for people to really understand that there are good scans out there, but it's really important to get the right one. And certainly I've met people who've had 8, 9, 10 scans through their life without a diagnosis, and we've done one endometriosis scan and it's been really clear what's going on, and it really helped them in their understanding why they're getting the pain. Suddenly everything falls into place, because about 38% of women will have pain from their first period. So it's a lot of women have had pain ever since they've had periods, and they've never had an answer.
Right. So can you describe how your project is new, how it's diagnosing women in a new way?
So we have had the scans for not very long, particularly we've adopted them in Australia reasonably early, but only a small number of places do them. And only a small number of people can actually read them and report them. And we're hoping that if we can use an algorithm that can look at lots and lots and lots of scans and automatically pick up these markers, they can use them in machines or on a cloud-based system, and people could upload their scans and images, and they would be able to get a diagnosis quite quickly, or their doctors could do that. And it would really help people to know whether to have surgery, whether to get other forms of medical treatment for endo, and what to do, to be able to go onto a site to find out more about what endo is and what they can do for endo as well.
Right, so there's a bit of a supply-demand mismatch there.
There's a huge supply, a huge supply and demand mismatch, because about nearly 1 in 10 women have endometriosis. So.
And there's not enough people with those specialised skills to be able to read those scans.
Yeah, because the actual number of women is enormous.
Definitely. And Jodie, can you describe the current treatment or management for PCOS?
Okay, so quite often women just get put on the pill, the oral contraceptive pill, but a lot of research has been done into diet and exercise. One of the first studies I ever worked on was a study at CSIRO looking at a PCOS diet, and that's actually become the total wellbeing diet. And I was actually involved in managing that study, and I was in it myself as well. We looked at how a high protein diet could help women with PCOS. And the other thing is exercise can really help as well. So those lifestyle factors, but it's really important to get young women to be involved in these lifestyle factors at a young age, because they just have to keep at it all their lives. Sometimes it's frustrating because they don't get the results they want. There's something in the makeup of women with PCOS that means that maybe they don't lose weight as quickly as other women who would exercise. So
very frustrating.
It's really frustrating. So basically the hormonal treatments or the lifestyle treatments are the way to go.
Right. And you mentioned that you were involved in the research yourself.
Yeah.
When were you diagnosed with PCOS?
When I was 16.
Right.
So, a long time. But I'm one of the lucky ones because I managed to have my children quite late at 36 and quite easily. So I think I thought I was going to have problems, but I went to see one of the specialists and immediately got pregnant just because I went to see him. Yeah. Because it's a real psychological thing as well quite often. So that was very lucky.
Okay. And what can you describe for us your research, your current project?
Okay, so my current project is actually looking at quality of life or distress in women with PCOS, and we're going to design a new tool, because the tools that are used to describe quality of life in women with PCOS aren't that great, because they look at things like, if you use a generic quality of life tool, you're looking at how far can you walk, can you bathe yourself, things like that. But we're really interested in the impacts that PCOS have on women's day-to-day life and their relationships, and what are the most important things to them. So we're going to interview about 200 women and find out what are the most important things and how women value each of those things in their lives as well. And we're going to call it the Hera Qual. So,
what does that mean?
So it's named after Hera, who is the goddess of misery, I think, but also childbirth and things like that. So
very positive.
We are actually going to use it, the same quality of life questionnaire, and do one for endo and do one for miscarriage and things like that after we've validated this first one. So it's going to be a long-term project, so we're only just starting. Yeah. It's very exciting. Yeah.
So important though, because as soon as that level of quality of life is acknowledged and understood, then the attention is given that it deserves.
Yeah.
So I know that both conditions that we're discussing, PCOS and endometriosis, both don't have a cure. Is that right? Or have I just made that up?
No, that's right.
Yes, so with endo, we do surgery and we remove the lesions, and sometimes we would, but we don't really anticipate that we would remove every single little lesion, because sometimes they're microscopic. But also, even if we do, sometimes the sensitisation of the neural pathways and the pain mechanisms that has to be treated in a different way, because if your dorsal root ganglion and your spine is activated, you have to actually work on treatments for that. Yeah. And removing the lesion won't change that. So, and if you've got pelvic floor spasm, you have to actually do physiotherapy to relieve the spasm. And again, removing the lesion won't change that. Yeah. So usually you have to look at a multidisciplinary team. Increasingly, we're asking the women themselves to work out their needs so that we can source the right people for them at that moment in time. And endometriosis can change over time too. So the treatments you have put into place in your self-care and your treatment team that works when you're 15 may be quite different to when you're 30, because you may be wanting to have a baby, you may have to go off the pill, you may have to change what you want to do, or the endo might have changed over time. So you then have to get a different treatment team that might involve a fertility specialist, or you may need surgery at some point. And so you do have to be continually managing endo, and it's sort of a condition where we think that optimising pain management and fertility and really ensuring people can get the most out of their life, that they're not unable to work, unable to socialise, unable to have relationships. We're really trying to make sure that endo is a really small part of your life. It will always be there, but all the rest of it's bigger. And we want to make that as big as we can, and this is an endo as small as you can, and just make sure that our interventions are at the right time and place and really targeted for that particular person, because no two people have the same symptoms, have the same course, and have the same outcomes. So we really have to look after each person as an individual.
Right. And you mentioned in there the contraceptive pill.
Yes.
What role does that play in the treatment plan?
We use the contraceptive pill quite a lot for lots of reasons, but the main one is we actually often run the pill packets together so that women don't have to have as many periods.
Right.
And if we can run the pill packets together and not have a pain trigger every single month by having a menstrual pain trigger, we can reduce the pain triggers and all the pain symptomatology. And if we can get younger women to have 4 periods a year, they can have their periods in the school holidays, so they're not at school and they're not going to miss school. And some women can run the packets together continuously, so they don't get a period at all.
Right.
But even if you can have 2 a year, it's much better than 12 a year.
Yeah.
And so we often use the pill to do that. The pill also makes the lining of the womb grow less. It tends to be moderated, so you tend to not have such heavy periods, and often they're not quite so painful. So often the pill, even if people have to have a period every month because they can't run the packets together, it can be really useful.
Right. And do you think that there is a cure in the near future or the foreseeable future for either of these conditions?
I think there's probably going to be things we can do to prevent complications. So if we can recognise things earlier, we can put things in place to prevent some of the pain, complex pain syndromes.
Yeah.
And also we certainly can prevent fertility, reduce the risk of a fertility problem, because we can freeze eggs now.
Yeah.
So if women with endo often have fewer eggs, and often they take longer to conceive, and we can actually freeze eggs when they're younger, and they can come back and they can be their own donor for when they're ready to have a family. Right. So there's lots of different things, and we can measure the eggs now too to know if that's important for someone, particularly if they're needing a lot of surgery on the ovary, which can reduce egg numbers too.
That is so important, yeah. So Jodie, have you noticed a huge change in this space since you were diagnosed with PCOS?
I think women are more empowered to find out the information that they need. I spend a lot of time looking at all the groups on Facebook and things like that, and the information that women can get nowadays, because they've got access to the internet, is great, but there are a lot of myths out there that need to be busted.
Louise, do you think what do you think are the factors, so whether they be social, medical factors, that have contributed to that positive change in this space?
In both PCOS and endo, certainly I think social media's contributed a lot. With both conditions, the language is about talking about periods, and that has been such a taboo topic for many, many years in our society, particularly talking with men or, with colleagues, and I think the changes have been that it's so much more acceptable in society to understand that menstruation's a biological change, and people have felt empowered to say, I have endometriosis and this is what my symptoms are. And we now have a menstrual schools program that is actually going and teaching young people, men, boys and girls, about menstrual problems and what they are and how to look at them and how to manage them and how to help someone who is your sister or your partner or your daughter or, you know, your employee or employer, you know, if they are needing to manage that and they're getting pain symptoms, and just having some understanding around that, I think it has allowed women to actually talk about it. They've recognised that there has been so little funding and so little research or work done to actually really understand the condition and also to provide better medical treatments and medications and diagnostics. And, you know, really there haven't been very good tools because there has been so little research in this space. And we're now getting people who are prepared to say, this is what I have, this is my story, you know, this should be supported in society. And that was very hard to find people who would feel comfortable enough to talk about that. And now we have politicians who will talk about it. We have, you know, senior people in senior positions who have endometriosis who are prepared to acknowledge that publicly. And also, you know, people are prepared to ask for help from their teachers or from their colleagues or from their employer in a way that they would have been too embarrassed to ask for help in the past. And that's been amazing. And that's partly been social media, because people now are not isolated. They can go online and find groups and find social support. And we're actually also developing a digital platform for the government about endometriosis, and, you know, to be able to give people some tools of what to do if they've got those symptoms.
Absolutely. I think you're so right. When a topic isn't discussed, when it's a taboo, solutions can't be found because you need to have that conversation. And so I'm so grateful for both of your voices in these areas, and I'm sure all of our listeners on the Discovery Pod are very grateful as well. So thank you so much for your time, and I hope you had as much fun as I did. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Discovery Pod, proudly brought to you by the University of Adelaide.